Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 219 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Arena, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. That's ContinueFit.com. Check it out there, and a quick reminder, you can sign up for the Success Series that I did. 5 audio interviews on achieving success in the fitness business. Check it out and let me know what you think. All right, today on the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about Keir Wenham-Flatt's article, Aerobic Training, Science versus the Real World. Lots of chatter about that, not only on Facebook, but on the StrengthCoach.com forum. A thread called Heavy Sled Mechanics, and an article he wrote, Stuart McGill, called Making the Split Squat Work for You. That and much more coming up on the Coach's Corner in a little while. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Alan Cosgrove is on to talk about never discounting or doing deals. Important stuff from Alan. For the Functional Movement System segment, Eric DeGotti starts a 3-part series about foot positions. He's calling that the Power of 3. And for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on the back mechanic, Dr. Stuart McGill. He's on with international powerlifting champion Brian Carroll. This is a part 1 of a part 2 series. They just released their book, The Gift of Injury. Great stuff. Brian got injured, saw Dr. McGill, worked his way back to a championship, and they wrote a book about it. Great stuff. Brian will tell his story and how it led him to Stu's explanation of Brian's injury, the assessment and purposely provoking pain, Stu's 2-stage recovery program to recovery, buy-in, how important it is, especially in the beginning stages, a review of the McGill Big 3, and approaching every lift with the same intensity. So that's, again, part 1 of this part 2 series. Great stuff. Lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the Coach's Corner and the Q&A for StrengthCoach.com following. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All right. Hey, let's start out with, Keir Wenham-Flatt wrote a great article called Aerobic Training, Science versus the Real World. And I just want to read kind of how he opened up. He was just talking about, this idea of the two, aerobic and aerobic training. And he kind of sounds like he mentioned to you, he got some criticism on the forum from a well-known American strength coach who he respects very much. He's a big consumer of your work, so that sounds like you. Says you were criticizing aerobic training. Obviously, we know that's not you're not a big fan of that, but does not make for fast or explosive athletes. He believes it makes you slower, weaker, and less explosive. In your defense, Coach Boyle, he said a good chunk of the science supports his arguments. Research shows the more you train muscle fibers in an aerobic environment, the more likely they are to take on slow twitch characteristics, i.e. smaller size, slower contraction, velocity, higher resistance to fatigue. And then in his defense, though that the science may appear compelling, he believes that the argument is nowhere near conclusive in the real world. As much as he dislikes what they do, CrossFit athletes demonstrate capably that is possible to have not world-class, but very decent levels of strength and power and aerobic development. Likewise, MMA and other combat athletes have relied heavily on road work and other LSD training methods while demonstrating impressive explosiveness. So, that's kind of almost like a Mike Boyle argument, to be honest with you. Like, the science is there, but, you've been doing this for so long, and this is what Keir has been seeing with his athletes. Talk to us about this thread.
Yeah, and that was why I put it up, because I thought, when I read it, I thought, hey, he's got some valid points in terms of that's not what he's seeing. And so I put it up with the idea that let's let's get some people to maybe think about this a little bit more. Even, obviously I already thate about it because I read the article and I thought, hey, that's a pretty good rationale. And one of the things I want to do is rather than, one year Martin Rooney was talking at the Perform Better in New Jersey, and he said something to the effect of, don't believe everything you read and don't read only what you believe. And I wrote that down. I wrote it, and I think I've used that in a couple of my talks. So I think that's what we've got to be thinking about, is this idea, because that's what I criticize everybody else for. You've got like whatever, the musclehead powerlifting crowd, and they believe what they believe and they don't listen to anybody else. And it's sort of, in my situation, if I'm going to be critical of that, then I have to be willing to present the other side. So that was why I linked to it, because he makes a valid point. And I guess what I wanted to do is, okay, let's prompt some discussion around that and see if other people come to similar conclusions that I did, in terms of, one, obviously, I think the person least likely to be screwed up is somebody who's very high on the anaerobic side. The other person who's probably the least likely to be influenced, if we're thinking about influenceability of muscle fibers, but my thing is, I feel like I'm always talking in this broad generalization of people who are working with, pro athletes, young athletes, college athletes. And so I still would kind of believe what I believe, in the sense that I'm not going to recommend that people do steady state aerobic work. But the flip side is, might be you guys, we do a lot of 5 mile airdyne stuff, which, again, the interesting thing was, it wasn't as much on the Strength Coach side. I also posted it on the Strength Coach Facebook page, because I like to try to draw people off of that page, hopefully into the site. And one guy was linking to a bunch of other articles. And one of the things that they had said in that article was that, this difference when it's threshold work as opposed to cardiac output work, I think, and that's where one of the, the disagreements, I just finished a chapter on conditioning, kind of based on the complete conditioning product that I did with Pat, for a book that Pat's going to put out, I think, through his coaching association thing that he's developing. He's going to put a textbook together. But it's that same idea of, you've got to think about, like, the Charlie Francis stuff. You've got guys on one end of the spectrum like Charlie believing that we can really influence those muscle fibers. And then you've got a guy like Keir on the other end saying, hey, I don't think so. And then, you've got Tony Hollaback on the Charlie Francis side. And so you clearly have this, like Alan likes to talk about, the pendular kind of thing. You've got this pendulum approach here, where the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, in the sense that, yeah, would it be terrible to do some threshold rides, some 15-minute really hard airdyne type stuff? Is that going to make you slow? I would look at it and think, no, probably not. But I guess the difference, what I worried about and what I talked about in the article that I wrote, is people have to remember that I come from a time when we did 1.5-mile runs with football teams. Like, I can remember making our offensive linemen run 1.5 miles for time, and the coaches saying that was going to, sort of validate their fitness for preseason. You know what I mean? Like, they got to break 9 minutes in the 1.5 miles, or whatever it was, or they had to run. It was 12 minutes for 1.5 miles was like, what the linemen had to do. And I mean, when I think about it now, it was one of the stupidest. It's like the stupidity level was so high that it's embarrassing now to think about. But that was where we were in whatever, 1984 or whatever it was.
Coach, but, he brought up some other, Keir did in the, like he was saying, thinking out loud, here's a few things you need to bear in mind. One of the things that I liked what he said was, do any of the studies show aerobic training impedes strength or power? Did those studies include heavy, explosive strength work to offset these potentially negative effects? Similar to you saying, we're going to do our dynamic warm-up after our static warm-up, because any potentially negative effects of the static static stretching is going to be reversed by this dynamic warm-up. That's the same thing.
That was another one of the points that I thought was really, really solid. Like, it makes you think about it, because that's one of the things where it's always, when people are like, oh, you got to look at the research. You got to look at the research. I'm like, the research isn't generally that good, because you don't have, like he's saying, he's pointing out some examples of a CrossFit guy who can whatever squat 500 and run a 5-minute mile. And I know those people are out there, and I think it's probably a valid question. My thing, I guess, is that if I'm going to error, I'm going to error on the side of tempo. And that was one of the things, I think towards the end of that thread, that was one of the things that guys talked about. Tim Carroll was talking about the disruption kind of front side mechanics, the idea that people aren't getting any knee lift and any knee drive. And I think it disrupts both front side and backside mechanics when you do lots of steady state stuff, because you've got someone they're not getting into hip flexion or hip extension. And then I go back to, and I got to go look in the Charlie Francis book. I think my Charlie Francis book is in my bookshelf that I'm looking at right now as I talk to you. But I believe it was he that talked about, you want to stay in the sprint motor pattern. That was something that I always thought about in terms of almost regardless of what we're doing, I'd like to do it in that sprint motor pattern. I'd like to stay out of jog. Because people always say to me, what's tempo? And I'm like, well, it's not jogging and it's not full speed sprinting. And, I always use the pornography and the Supreme Court analogy in terms of, you'll know tempo when you see it.
Yeah.
You'll know what's too slow and you'll know what's too fast. You look at people, and if they're racing the length of the field, that's not tempo. They're running too fast. And if you look at someone and they're jogging the length of the field, you're looking at it saying, that's not tempo, that's too slow. And, it's like the Three Bears, the porridge, you want it to be just right. And just right looks like a sprint, but it's not.
Yep.
And that's maybe, you start thinking, and this is where, we get into the whole MAS thing. Okay, it's 75%. So if you start looking, I was looking up some stuff today, and you'll appreciate this because Connor McDavid got clocked at, I want to say 24 miles an hour the other day on the ice. So I looked up trying to figure out what Bolt was because they had it all in kilometers. Bolt ran 27 at about the 70-meter mark. And, Connor McDavid, who's obviously got a smaller surface area to deal with, was at about 24. So you start looking at that and you say, well, gee, I want to be 75%. All right, what's 75% of 24? Now you start looking, all right, so that's probably what, like take off 8. It's about 16 miles an hour. And then you start saying, what's 16 miles an hour? Well, that's under a 4-minute mile, right? So you're still clipping along at a pretty good speed at 75%.
Interesting. I will remind people, December 20th, we're having what we're calling the Pro Coaches Clinic in New York City. You'll be doing kind of what we do here almost every time right now since you put out that product, because there's always so many questions. You've learned so much from this, and it still goes back and forth. This argument is never going to end, and it's really interesting, some of the things. But that's what your lecture is going to be on, kind of the evolution of complete sports conditioning on December 20th in New York City. So I want to remind everybody about that.
Yes, commercial interruption.
This is also kind of a good segue into the heavy sled mechanic thread. And the question was, do we want a hard stomp with each step, or do we want a forceful but smooth contact during the heavy sled march? And what's interesting, I think it's very similar to what we were just talking about. Why not, call it strength or call it speed, but where this kind of march almost looks like, why are we working on sprint mechanics with a sled? Why not either just push a really heavy sled and say we're working on strength, or a lighter sled to work on some speed? But talk to me about this idea about heavy sled march mechanics, and why, if you believe jogging or what, the LSD makes you slower, why wouldn't that sled make you slower, weaker, and less explosive?
Well, that's a good question. I think the sled, to me, is more, and that's why one of the things we talked about, we've gone to reps versus distance. So we've said to somebody, I want 20 steps, 10 with each leg. So basically I want a set of 10 rights, 10 lefts. And I want it to look like sprint motor pattern, which is why we've got that marching action, because I want the front side and backside mechanic. I don't want to look at it and think, this doesn't look like running. And this is where you get into, sometimes now you're into and in the Sled article, if you remember the one that we made into a PDF, we talked about special strength and specific strength, and you start getting into some of these Eastern European concepts, and it's like marching, and I get my special and specific, confused because that's how that kind of terminology is. But it's like marching is special and sprinting with the lighter sled is specific. And it's sort of, I think the idea, I had Daniel Martinez in this week on Monday, and is this continuum? And that you've got to work all through the continuum. You can't sort of be, I think Tony's idea would be, no, just be on one end of the continuum. Be on the fast end and go at 10 meters a second and everything will be fine. And there might be some other people who are just lift and be on the other end of the continuum and never go at 10 meters a second and just lift the heaviest weight that you can and you'll be fine. And I think the reality is probably something in the middle of those concepts, in the sense that we probably need to be sprinting at really high rates of speed, and we probably need to be lifting heavy weights, and we probably need to have that in-between stuff like the sled that is developing. I look at the sled now and I think I said that in when we would answer Navy's questions that time, I look at the sled as almost a specific leg pressing, squatting type of exercise where, okay, we are strength training our muscles in a very specific mode, really thinking about the right angles and the right ground contact. And maybe now you're more kind of into the, the Franz Bosch level.
Talk to me about, let's finish up with this for the podcast portion of this, making the split squat work for you. It's a kind of a thing you did with Stuart McGill. And I guess there was some, McGill had expressed some concern over the split squat, and you guys, kind of collaborated on this short article about, making it work for you. Give us an overview of this.
Yeah, I think because one of the things, I very rarely disagree with Stu about everything. I try to make a point of not disagreeing with Stu because I think he's really smart. But one of the things that I did disagree with is he, in a couple of his lectures, had brought up the fact that he thought that there could be some disruption of the pelvic ring in terms of some torsion, at the pubic symphysis, and I guess then correspondingly some SI joint irritation that could come from split squats, and particularly from heavy split squats. And so we batted that around on the forum a little bit a while ago. If you remember, I asked Kaz and Devin and a bunch of guys who had been doing this very consistently, hey, have you seen that? Have you had guys with low back pain? Have you seen any pubic symphysis kind of stuff? And the general consensus was the same as what I had felt, was that no, we haven't seen any of that. But, one of the things I had said is Stu basically sees people that are hurt. That's his world. And we were talking about the fact that if you were to split squat wrong, and that's more like with a really big, kind of back leg angle where you're really kind of in a deep, almost a really like a lunge type of pattern, almost a lunge stretch type of pattern, that you might get some torsion there. So Stu actually was kind enough himself to send me a quick email saying that, hey, somebody brought up the fact that we disagreed on something. And I emailed him back and said, well, here's what I think. I think, shorter stance done right, blah, blah, blah. And he said, hey, let's write that up and get that out there. So the one thing I love about Stu is that he's very, obviously he's a bright guy. Obviously he's a great guy to hang with and talk with and have a beer with. But he's also pretty proactive in terms of he really wants people to get good information. He's not worried about being right, maybe because he knows he's right about most stuff. But yeah. So I just think it was good to kind of get that out there, and so that people would stop saying, because now that's one of the things that I didn't like, was that people were using Stu to be anti-split squat when that wasn't really what he said. But again, I think what people do when they want that anti-position is they'll pick up anything that they think supports their position. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, McGill says split squats are bad too. And he's the leading expert. You're going to have pelvis problems if you do them.
Yeah.
So I just hopefully got to the point where we got the record straight. We've now got a piece somewhere sort of in the literature that if somebody argues that and says, McGill Boyle split squat, that piece is going to pop up if they Google it. And they're going to see that, well, if I stay more in this sort of something closer to 90-90, that there's a real good chance that's not going to happen. If I don't do it, super heavy in the back squat position, there's a good chance that's not going to happen. There's a bunch of things that we talked about.
All right, good stuff. Well, he's actually on the next two shows, on this show and then the next one, talking about with Brian Carroll, the gift of injury. And I don't know, when your complete core conditioning comes out, he might get a little mad at the straight leg sit up because I know he wouldn't like that. But
I can't 100% agree with that.
There you go.
But he gets a lot. He gets a lot of love in the early parts of the.
There you go.
The only guy who gets a book picture, I think.
There you go. All right, Coach. We're going to wrap up this portion of the podcast, Coach's Corner. We're gonna go on. I'll remind everybody we do this twice a month. Some questions with Coach Boyle. So we're going to wrap that up. So, Coach, thanks for doing this.
You are welcome, Anthony. No problem.
All right, just a reminder that Perform Better has 30% off selected items and free shipping on orders over $59. Restrictions do apply, so check it out. They got a lot of stuff on sale right now that's 30% off. The schedule for the one-day seminars has been announced with dates in New Jersey, San Francisco, LA, Tampa, Boston, Durham, Atlanta, and Tacoma. They've also announced the summits in Orlando, Providence, Chicago, and Long Beach, but no presenters yet. But when they do announce them, we're going to get those guys on here to talk all about it. You can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Also, if you want to check out the Perform Better Functional Training Institute, I did an episode on Strength Coach TV, so you can check that out at continuefit.com.
Hi, this is Eric Agatti of FMS, and this is the Functional Movement segment. Early on in taking courses with Gray and Lee, one of the most impactful moments I remember was when they told me that everything you do on your feet, you're doing in one of 3 foot positions. You're either doing it in a staggered or split stance, a single leg, or an open stance, bilateral stance. And I've been looking ever since to try to find a 4th stance, and I just can't find it. And so if everything's going to come down to those 3 stances, I started thinking, if we do all our on-your-feet movement training, which some people will call speed and agility work, we can really create a system for categorizing that and then actually testing and building your drills off of what you find in your testing. So I started thinking about it a little bit further. If we only have those 3 foot positions, we only really have 3 phases of movement. You're either accelerating and speeding up, you're decelerating and slowing down, or you're amortizing, basically transitioning from one to the other. And then the last piece of that was we're only moving in one of 3 directions. You're moving front and back in the sagittal plane, side to side in the frontal plane, or you're moving diagonally or rotationally in the transverse plane. So if you take those 3 elements, and that's how I came up with this power of 3 system I called, is that pretty much is the foundation for all our on-the-feet training for athletes. Is you're always in one of those 3 foot positions. You're always in one of those 3 phases of movement, and you're always in one of those 3 planes of movement. So if we can now take drills that wrap around and encompass all those different things, we pretty much have our whole system for quote unquote speed and agility training. So now what we can do is we can start with the most complex, which is single leg, deceleration, where we have most of our issues, and start building from there. And we could do some simple things like hop outs. And there's some great things out there like Jeremy Boone does with hop and stop, or some of the things we do in the FCS with 2-1-2 testing and single leg hops and so forth. We can start to create a baseline for how we look in that position. Then from there, you have your split stance. Your split stance is more correlated to deceleration in your breakdown positions in sports. So we're going to start to look, can a person go from moving into a breakdown position, which they're going to then transition into reacceleration in the amortization phase. Then from there, the open stance is the least used stance of all of them, depending on your position, probably most used by people like offensive linemen in football and least used by the more skill type positions. And then we start looking at the different phases of movement. We're going to look at first deceleration, as I said earlier, because that's where most of our injuries occur, and that's where a lot of our force is lost. So we're going to look at your ability to decelerate on a single leg, as well as in a breakdown position and a staggered position, and then eventually can you break down in an open stance. Last but not least, can you do this in all 3 planes? Can you not just do it front and back, but can you also do it side to side, and can you do it in rotation? And we look at this in 2 realms. We look at it first from a performance standpoint to say whatever aspect of those different combinations of the 3s is going to be your weakest link and going to be the area that you're going to lack performance-wise. But also from an injury perspective, this is the same ready-to-play test that I came up with as a last phase. Once I've put you through your SFMA and your FMS and your FCS. And we found all those components are there. Well, the last piece I'll look at is this on your feet movement, and we'll ramp up starting at 50% to 75%, eventually to 100% speed. So we can start to replicate what it's going to be when you get back out on the field and see, can you handle all these positions? And look at it. Can you handle it well? And more importantly, is there any pain when you do any of these things? Because we'll often have people that are cleared by their physical therapist or cleared by their athletic trainer, but yet still have pain in one of these different aspects. If that's the case, we now have a marker to go back to, and we're to look to try to find causative reasons why that may be there. Now, as we go into the training for this, that's something that we're going to break out in the next segments of this. This is going to be a 3-part series. In segment 2, we're going to start to break down how we look at it from a testing standpoint in what's called the ready to play test that I created, where we can look at how to evaluate all these different aspects from planes of movement to directions of movement, phases of movement and foot position. And then in the last piece, we'll talk about the training, how you actually progress the training through all these different aspects. But the key here is remembering those 3 different areas with 3 different components. First, again, is foot position, single leg, staggered or split stance, or open stance. Second piece is your phases of movement, either acceleration, deceleration, or amortization, which is, again, the transition from one to the other. And last piece is where we're looking at directions of movement, front and back in the sagittal plane, side to side in the frontal plane, and then transverse plane where we're looking at rotational or diagonal movement. Now, also realize when we're creating a profile with this, it's going to be specific to each athlete and not only what sport they play, but what position they play. So as an example, a lot of the baseball players that we work with, if I have an infielder, it's much more lateral and frontal plane movement, whereas an outfielder is going to be doing more rotation and diagonal movement as they're opening up and going to track down a fly ball, or if they're now working diagonally to try to get a ball into the gap. But we will break those down more in the segment that's coming up next, talking about the evaluation and assessment of the power of 3. And then in the last piece, we'll talk about how to actually train it and address it. Once again, my name is Eric Agati, and this has been the Functional Movement segment. Be sure to check us out for more information at www.functionalmovement.com.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness section here at the Strength Coach Podcast, strengthcoach.com. And this is Alan Cosgrove, and I'm going to do this week's episode in a Scottish accent just to shake it up a little bit for you guys and keep it interesting. And also because I can't do any other accents whatsoever. This week's lesson is about never discounting or doing deals. I see people all the time, and there's something that seems to be getting taught right now about what's this month's offer. What's our low barrier offer? Can we do $20 for 20 days? Can we do $19 for 3 workouts? Can we doing $10 to try the gym? What's the deal this month? And I'm going to tell you a personal story about that. I go to a local business. It's a cryotherapy place that I go like a couple of times a week. I really like it. The service is great. I believe in the product. And a couple of my staff go there. And the owner, who's a young guy, was telling me that one of my staff asked him if he could divide his membership and give another staff member a couple of sessions. And the owner said, I thought that was so cool that he offered that to another staff member. It's cool you guys got that cool culture there. So I just decided I would comp the other staff member a couple of weeks worth of sessions so they can, come in and be nice. Now, these are my staff, so I'm happy with that. But as a customer, here's what I'm hearing. You can divide up your membership and share it. So why do me and my wife have 2 memberships there? Why can't we just have one and split it? And I can give sessions to someone else for free. And also, this guy gives away sessions for free. Well, what I'm learning there is the only person paying full price, it seems, is me. I'm getting screwed. Why would I stay at this company? Now, he is trying to do the right thing, and he is trying to build his business and do something nice and let someone experience it. But it's almost like this sort of cable TV model, right, or satellite TV, where if you've been with cable TV or satellite TV for 10 years, I guarantee your loyalty is not being rewarded. You're paying more than anybody else who joins this month. They'll get locked in with free NFL Sunday ticket for 2 years, right? To just keep them as a member. And that's the problem, is it alienates your current members. It trains the prospect to wait because there's going to be an offer coming up soon where you're going to discount your prices, or you're going to go 50% off and you're going to do a great deal. And it never trains your staff to sell a membership, because if you're not there, your staff know that you freestyle it, and occasionally you give somebody 20% off because they're a friend, or they went to your high school, or they're a friend of a friend, so they pay less. Never discount or do deals. Come up with your fees and stick to that. If you want to do an offer, create a new program. This may be only a once a week program where they can come in at a lower price point, right? Where they're not getting the whole service for free, or you're cutting a price off your Remember, this is a different thing from a deal. Is a different thing from a trial offer. You can do a lower price trial offer, but never do a deal where if you pay up front, I'll give you 3 months for free. It alienates your customers, and it destroys the fence and the loyalty, and it trains the prospects to just wait because there'll be a lower price coming. And it's like going shopping for a car. You never really know what the price is. It doesn't empower your staff to make the right answer. So we never discount. In this economy, we never discount. We always enhance. If you want to add a goodie bag or a loot bag when someone signs up, you want to add an extra first session, someone signs up. Now, it sounds like semantics, but it's completely different in your psychology. So there's the lesson, is come up with your fees, be a pro, and stick to them. They're not negotiable. We don't discount. We don't do deals. Everybody gets treated the same. And a good rule of thumb we have is that if you remain a member of our gym, we'll never increase your fees. We make a bigger increase for people going forward, right? We'll make it up by making big increases rather than small increases. We want to reward the loyalty of our customers and our clients. So that's it. The lesson is never discount, never do deals, just always enhance. Come up with your systems, come up with your prices, and stick to it, and be fair. That was this podcast edition of the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Facebook or hit me up in the strengthcoach.com forum, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach, and today I have on very cool episode Dr. Stuart McGill and international powerlifting champion Brian Carroll. They just released a book called The Gift of Injury, The Strength Athlete's Guide to Recovering from Back Injury and Winning Again. Guys, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning, Ann.
I love this book, first of all. I love the way you guys did this, kind of going back and forth with Brian talking, telling his story, and then Stu going over and interjecting his parts. This is a very cool way to do a book. I love it. And there's a lot of stuff in this book. I think section 4, that could be a book on its own right there. And there's some gems in here. So let's start out with Brian. Explain your story and what happened, because this is, you got pretty low. It got pretty bad, and people forget how bad it can be living with pain. So let's go over that first.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been powerlifting for quite a long time and had immediate success. I had my first all-time record within about 3.5 years of my first full competition. So I was 25 years old, and I had the biggest squat ever done in the 220 weight class, regardless of country, federation, testing, any of that stuff. I'd just beaten one of the legendary West Side barbell guys named Chuck Vogelpool. I just beat his record that stood for 5 years that no one saw this coming. So I kind of hit the scene pretty quick, and from there I did damage in multiple weight classes, in both competition and to my body, obviously. And the damage was done from multiple different things. Not enough deloads, not enough proper planned training program with the right amount of a downtime. I was real sloppy with the way I moved, looking back, of course, after being made aware of this by Stu. And I ended up in a really bad place come 2011, after I squatted my second all-time world record of 1185 at 275. So you notice I gained weight and gained size and moved up from 220 to 242 to 275 and set records in each class. But I had to pay a price for this. And the bad movement patterns that I had day to day, the load that I was taking, 1,200 pounds on the squat, over 800 pounds on the deadlift, over 800 pounds on the bench, became cumulative. And I did have a fall in 2009 where I landed on my sacrum pretty hard. And looking back, that's where we thought a lot of the back problems started, but everything else became cumulative of the poor movement patterns and the lack of a really sound approach in many ways. And that left me seeing surgeons, 2 orthopedic surgeons, a couple neurosurgeons that didn't really have a definitive fix for me. They just told me to stop lifting. And we both know, or all three of us know here, that that's not really much of a solution. Just stop lifting because the damage is done. Well, what are you going to do? You're just going to operate on me and turn me loose and say, okay, stop lifting and everything will be fine. Well, that's not likely at all that that's the case. So a client led me to hit Stu up on a phone call, get a hold of him and tell him what I had going on. And I sent him an email with my MRI, and he said, you need to come up because I don't see a surgery pathway that's a fix for you. And I got with Stu in May of 2013, and I guess you could say the rest is history.
Absolutely. One thing to point out there is I think it's important, there's a lot of nails in that coffin, right? I mean, it's not just, powerlifting. It's not just poor movement patterns. It's not just that fall that you took. It's really a lot of things that add up over time and as we get older. So, Stu, why don't you explain really this injury and how bad it really was?
Yes. Well, I'll just preempt that by describing the method of how we arrive at understanding an injury when an athlete arrives here. First of all, we do a very in-depth interview and assessment of how they're moving. We try and get an idea of their habits, and then we purposefully provoke their pain. In so doing, we learn what are the physical load patterns that cause the pain. Well, in Brian's specific case, there were 3 patterns. One was just straight compressive load down his back was causing pain. When he bent his spine, that caused pain. And we detected joint instability, which happens when a disc loses a little bit of its height. It's like letting air out of your car tire. It gets a bit sloppy on the road. Well, your spine does the same thing. And that was the 3rd pain mechanism. So when we get down to that level of precision, it shows us exactly what the athlete needs to stop doing, to stop irritating the pain trigger and let it desensitize. But it also is the beginning of programming to build a foundation to become pain-free. Once that formality is over, only then do we look at the imaging. And in Brian's case, it was very revealing. Now, I'm not saying what the typical practice and what Brian experienced was he would go and see the surgeon, and the surgeon would put his MRI images up on the view box and start declaring what he needs. This is not helpful for most people. But once we assessed Brian and understood his pain mechanisms and his training patterns and all of this, we could then look at his MRs and really get a good interpretation. Well, what we saw was very surprising. He had split his sacrum front to back. This was a really major injury, and it started to explain why he couldn't tolerate compressive load. The L5 vertebra was very heavily fractured and crushed, top and bottom, and the discs above and below were very, very heavily compromised. So we knew at that point we had some major tissue rebuilding to do, and the MRI told us that, but all the assessment and pain provocation really guided us on the progression that Brian needed to take.
Stu, can you just back up for a second? That this idea of purposely provoking pain, obviously, it's not really something that I can do, or maybe it is. Tell us how are you purposely provoking pain? And also, because if I go to my doctor, and I did this summer, had some, the images said I had some L1, L2, and L2, L3, small disc herniations, but he didn't provoke any pain, and I'm, a lot of us get stuck. We don't have Stu McGill to go to, so how do you do that?
Well, first of all, Ant, you could have given me a call, but after that, yes, in the American medical system, it's not possible for a person to go to a doc and get a precise diagnosis of their pain mechanism. It takes about 3 hours, and that's what makes our approach rather unique. But in terms of pain provocation, we purposefully probe and provoke that person's pain so we understand the mechanism. So we begin with specific postures, motions, and then we load them to see whether pain is caused or the person is very resilient to certain modes of loading and movement. Then we perform specific tests to try and isolate loads into the suspected tissues. So say it was an SI joint, we would then stress the SI joints in the pelvic ring to see if the athlete reported pain. Then immediately, say they did cause pain, we would try, and if it was a pain from a micro movement in the joint or an unstable pattern, we would add some stability through playing with different muscle sequencing patterns to try and add appropriate stiffness. If it's compression, there's not a heck of a lot you can do except try and find the posture of the spine that becomes the most load resilient. Anyway, so we start with motions, postures, loads, then we go to specific tissues, then we go to complex movement patterns. So it might be simply something like walking. In Brian's case, obviously, we then went into his world and looked at the powerlifting moves to see very precisely what elements were causing pain and what elements were tolerable, so we could get an idea on programming his recovery.
I love this idea of the two stages, and this first, like, listen, we're getting rid of pain, and we're gonna get into talk to Brian in a minute after Stu explains a little bit of how that approach, because there's got to be some buy-in here as well on Brian's part. So Stu, this idea of the approach to get rid of pain. Talk to us about those two stages, and then this walking program. Just go over it a little bit, because I was a little confused in like what that consisted of, and like, was moving the arms, or was it brisk walking, and the big three. Can you just review that and this approach to get rid of pain?
Well, it's interesting when you interview an athlete or a patient. I always ask, what's your goal in all of this? Because I'm looking for impediments as to why they never healed with previous attempts. And if the person says, well, my goal in all of this is I want to play golf. Well, then I say, well, what has been your rehab program? And I find out that they've actually been doing mobility through their spine to try and play golf. And I said, well, you failed because you never got out of pain, and you couldn't do the training you needed to restore your body to tolerate golf. Well, in Brian's case, he had to he wanted to return as a powerlifter. So the first stage was not to go back and train powerlifting or train strength or anything like that. It was 100% dedicated focus to doing the things that would wind down his pain sensitivity. In our assessment, we would look at appropriate mobility and stability. And and you know, I know who I'm talking to. It's the whole strength coach thing of appropriate tune mobility in the hips, not too much and not too little. It has to be right on the money, so to speak, for powerlifting. Very appropriate stiffness through the spine when you're asking this flexible rod to bear a load. You know, look, I'm not creating a dancer here that needs spine mobility. I'm creating a powerlifter who has to bear well over half a ton of load on their back. So the point is, it has to be done in 2 stages, and that's part of the buy-in that you were talking about earlier. Brian can talk about that whole process of buying in, but the athlete has to realize, first and foremost, goal number 1 is to reduce that pain sensitivity. Once achieved, we then morph the program into building the foundation that they're going to need to perform their sport.
Cool. Brian, yeah, talk about the buy-in, the importance, because again, here we are, you're an international, I mean, you've broken records, you're a champion, and you know, you were even talking about one of the lectures you were doing with Dave Tate, and people kind of giving you a hard time at first, so you got to like bite the bullet a little bit and do your thing. And so talk about that buy-in and talk about this idea of too many people are going to say, yeah, I can beat this, I'm just going to keep going just with some lighter weight.
So number 1, there was lots of things that I overlooked. You know, a lot of the time when we're looking for a cure, we overlook the most simple things, right? We're looking for the most expensive, the most complicated, the most far down the line solution there is, because we think, well, I'm so messed up or I'm so injured, it's got to be something more than just the way I'm moving, just the way I'm sitting, just the way I'm treating my body day to day. That was the biggest thing that I realized when I went to the lab clinic in 2013. But when I did go to the lab in 2013, before I walked in to meet Stu for the first time, we'd had multiple phone conversations over the course of a month or so. We'd built a rapport, we liked each other, and when I went in there, I dropped the ego 100%. That same ego that helped me squat, you know, all in all in my powerlifting career, over 53 times, squats over 1,000 pounds officially, the most by any powerlifter, regardless of weight class or division or anywhere in the world. That same ego that helped me become a powerlifting champion, I had to also dial back and say, look, I've tried it my way. I've tried to see the surgeons. I've tried to see the doctors to no avail. It's time to start something different. I'm going to walk in here and I'm going to apply every single thing this guy does and tells me, and I'm going to start over as a complete beginner, no matter what it takes, no matter how much it hurts. That's the key. Most people cannot do that. Most people will come in, and I'm not saying most people that come to see Stu, because those are typically the more serious, but I can't tell you how many times that people have asked me how I beat back pain, and I try to tell them you have to deload the body, you have to let it desensitize. You can't load the pain, you can't load the dysfunction. You know, you'll have corrupted motor patterns just because you're hurt. It's just what happens. They can't drop the weight and not. They'll try to go, instead of squatting 400 or 600 pounds, they'll try to squat 400 pounds and think they're going to heal themselves, and they can't drop the ego and just stop lifting. They can't stop their powerlifting program and actually do a true desensitizing program that will help them on the road to success. And the ego is the biggest thing, and I see it all the time, and it's why people stay injured.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Now, you were doing this walking program a couple times a day. Just give us some idea, like, what was it? Just a regular walk for 15 minutes? Was it just a brisk walk? Was there something specific you were doing?
Yeah, so I didn't do anything for the first 30 minutes of the day. I got my coffee. I usually don't eat lunch or eat any food until around lunchtime or about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I get up, have my coffee, see what I have going on during the day and what I need to do. I would go for a walk about 30 or 45 minutes later, 15-minute brisk walk with the arms swinging. Always felt it, traction in my back. I always felt much better each time I walked. I would come back and do the McGill Big 3. I would work, and then I'd do another session in the afternoon. And eventually it got to the point where I was doing 3 15-minute walks a day. And I could feel the athleticism start to return to my body, because not just the core stability I was building and the capacity that was coming back, but I was moving so much better. And I can't hammer that home enough about the movement patterns that we had to correct in the lab clinic that day. I was bending into flexion. I was not compressive tolerant, and it was because of the way I was sitting in a chair, the way I was picking up a pin off the floor, and the way I was loading weight on the bar was far too casual. And that was the first thing that we nipped in the bud when Stu and I got together. The casual day-to-day movements that became cumulative and that were causing me so much grief.
Stu, can you explain why do we need this big arm swing in the walk? Why is this walk a special? What's going on with this walking?
Yeah, well, let me just back up a little bit and talk about the mechanics of walking and how they're absolutely essential when you're restoring a person out of back pain. I'll just give an example from a child with a paralyzed quadratus lumborum. So if you go to the neurology ward at the hospital, you might find the odd case of a child who has a paralyzed QL. That's the muscle that runs up the side of the lumbar spine. Let's take the example, the right QL doesn't work. You'll notice that child cannot walk. When they stand on their right leg and swing their left leg, the gait pattern looks fine. But when they plant their left leg and swing their right, their pelvis drops right down, and their spine bends, and they become, they almost fall over. So it's a very perturbed gait pattern. What I'm proving is the stiffness and activation of quadratus lumborum, which is a core muscle, it's right in the middle of the torso, is absolutely essential for walking. So when you're trying to restore function to a painful spine, walking is the beginning of frontal plane strength and athleticism. But now the trick is you've got a person where everything you do to their back hurts. So you have to try and deload as much as possible, but we still are looking for patterns like walking. So swinging with the arms and specifically swinging about the shoulders creates an elastic storage and recovery. So as the right arm moves forward and the left leg moves forward, you've created a crossing elastic storage in the person's back. But if they swing their arms about the elbows and they stiffen their shoulders, this doesn't occur. So pain is very interesting. Pain in some athletes creates a stiffness through the shoulders, and therefore they have to get the mobility through their lower back and pelvis, keeping the pain pattern going. So this is a corrupted pattern, corrupted by pain. So recognizing that in Brian, we had to add a little bit more stiffness through his lower back and add a little bit more laxity and jauntiness. And so part of the coaching there was to get him to swing through the shoulders and walk quite briskly, but now it has to be in tolerable intervals. So when the athlete says, well, I walk 45 minutes a day, but it hurts, and I almost want to say, well, good, you deserve your pain because you're programming the training exposure to pick the scab. However, you don't get in pain if you walk 20 minutes, do you? And they'll say, well, no, I can tolerate 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. So now you program in short, tolerable intervals to guarantee pain-free success. So in Brian's case, he was able to quite quickly be very successful, not break into pain with 3 15-minute exposures to walking through the day. So that's the science behind it and some of the principles that we explain in the book that are tuned to the person's tolerance, and it really guides them out of the pain sensitivity.
Stu, can you just review, I know we've done this before, but for people that don't know it, just get a quick review of the big three.
Well, once again, these are negotiable exercises. How we developed them was we realized, and I'm going back 30 years, that a person, because their body is an articulated linkage, needs proximal stiffness and stability to unleash distal athleticism. And again, this is a concept very familiar to the strength coach folks. But then our challenge was how do we come up with exercises that guarantee this proximal stability in a way that's very tolerable for a low tolerant spine. The big three were exercises that kept bubbling up to the top of the heap when we assessed maximum stability, minimum spine load, and then we would program them, as you know, on 10-second holds to create a very tolerable programming. So for the back, it turned out to be the bird dog exercise. And for a very disabled back, I think, Brian, you started very humbly by just raising one arm at a time and then one leg at a time. And then as he gained tolerance, he did opposite arm, opposite leg, and then started drawing geometric shapes. And when you measure it, it really challenges the various aspects of multifidus, latissimus dorsi. It really starts to get the orchestra playing, and more importantly yet, when you analyze it, if you extend the left leg, you're really challenging the left glute. You're challenging the right latissimus dorsi. You will find that pattern again and again and again in the strength athlete. So there are many reasons why that exercise bubbled up to the top for a painful person. For the side musculature, you cannot beat side planks. Only half of the muscles are being challenged so that it's only half the load on the spine. Then we start getting the athlete to breathe deeply and really getting the diaphragm athletic and pumping and building pressure. It challenges quadratus lumborum, the obliques, latissimus dorsi. It's a fabulous foundation. And then for the front, now that really depends on the athlete. Brian began with a modified curl up, which is the motion is really constrained because his back didn't take much motion. We had a lot of tissue rebuilding to do. So he just hovered his head and shoulders while lifting his elbows. Hands were under his low back to, again, create load tolerance in his back. He bent one knee to take load off the sciatic nerve because of the radiating symptoms he was getting down out of his leg. And fairly quickly, correct me if I'm off base here, Brian, but you moved on to stir the pot and much more progressive frontal chain stiffening exercises. And I'm calling them stiffening, which will sound odd to some people, but again, I'm building a spine here to bear a load, and that's stiffening. If we were building a dancer, it would be a different approach, or a gymnast, for example, but that's not the strength athlete in the powerlifter. But anyway, there's a quick summary of the big three.
So, Brian, are you still using like this idea of the big three? Because I feel like what I've been doing since the summer is I've been doing it, and I think in the book you guys explain it really well too, with this bracing effect. It braces this intricate network that supports the spine, and quote unquote spine coverage throughout the day. It lasts if you can do it a couple times. Brian, are you still doing kind of before, almost in a warm up or just as a daily routine? Are you still doing that?
Absolutely. It's part of my everyday daily routine as well as walking, because what I learned, I've learned so much in the last 5 years, but what I did learn is you can never be complacent. And that's a whole array of things. That's from a unloaded barbell in the clinic of May of 2013 that I treated with no respect, or becoming complacent because I'm pain-free and then stopping everything that helped build that capacity and turning my back on that would be absolutely foolish. So let me back up for a second, if you would. When I went to the clinic that day, Stu and I ended up in a negotiation, and we discussed this in the sections of the book. Stu was very confident that he could get me out of pain. He saw some really good things in the lab that day, that he saw some light bulbs go off, and he was confident that he could get me out of pain. But I told him that, hey, once I get out of pain, with my wife next to me, and I looked at her and then Stu and said, when I get out of pain, I'm going to return back to powerlifting, because I still have a couple things that I want to hit in powerlifting. And, before I'm done. And Stu looked at me, right in my eye and said, you're there now, Brian. You don't have anything left in your back, really. We can get you out of pain. And I said, well, once I get out of pain, I'm going to want to return. And he said, well, if you were my son, I would urge you to retire. But tell you what, here's a negotiation. You get out of pain, you stabilize everything, come back up this fall in 6 months, and we'll discuss it. Who knows? Maybe you're right. Maybe we rebuild you, and we end up writing a book about it. And here we are.
I love it. Now, a really important coaching thing. One of the things I learned from Stu is, and I tell everybody this, and everybody gives me a hard time about it. All my clients used to give me a hard time, because first of all, I walk around doing, I don't care what kettlebell it is, I pick it up and I kind of do the brace and the breath. I tell them, listen, if you're picking your keys up, this is how I want you to do it. Brian, talk about that, this idea about treating reps the same every time, the importance of that. Can you go over this idea about you picking up that 45-pound barbell?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that Stu hammered me on really quick, and that's being too casual with day-to-day movements and then warming up. So you have to turn on that killer instinct while you're warming up. It's not just something you say, okay, I'm going to turn it on as, the weight approaches a 500-pound deadlift where it's a little over 50%. No, it starts with the bar. It starts in my warm-up. And a warm-up is just as much physical as it is mental. You're turning on that killer instinct, that mental furnace to really be able to recruit every bit of your body, your mind and your body to pull these weights and lift these weights from the floor. So it's one of those things that, how many people do we both know that have blown their backs out in their cubicle, picking up their keys or picking up their pen as they lean over out of their chair in flexion and sneeze? I know so many people that are injured from non-athletic movement that occurred in the workplace. So there's no room for sloppiness, and it really changed my approach to my life. Everything is a one-legged good morning to reach something if it's light. It's a squat to get my hips involved if it's something a little more significant than I need to pick up. And then it's a lunge if it's something that's a little more convenient to lunge to, but it's no more rounding over casually to grab something off the floor, which was a big part of my injury mechanism. And getting away from that, and a lot of people think it's too good to be true, but by doing these little things, you actually put money in the bank. You put deposits into your athletic account. What happens when you overdraw your bank accounts? You have no money left. You're in trouble. So it's the same analogy with lifting. You overdraw too many times with not enough deposits, you end up athletically bankrupt. And it's something you can't do. And that applies with the lighter weights, a lighter kettlebell, a 25-pound dumbbell you're picking up to do some warm-ups with, or a kettlebell. There's no such thing as casual in any kind of professional athletics. And the people that do that are really missing out on a lot.
Absolutely. Stu, is this something that you're just seeing with absolutely every person that comes in?
Well, no. There's never an absolute in this game, but absolutely people have to build a training capacity. And if they expend their finite capacity by the way they get on and off the toilet and tie their shoe, even the great athletes, by the way, violate this, and they don't realize, but they're losing their ability for training. When we restore what we call spine hygiene, so throughout the day, they move in ways not to pick the scab, allow the pain desensitization to occur. Now, as Brian has put it, they've earned some capacity to train pain-free. That's fabulous. That's what we're trying to do. So I would say generally we have to work on that with every pain person. Build or earn that pain-free capacity to train by avoiding the pain trigger throughout the day.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, I'm going to leave this here. So this has been part 1. We're going to do part 2 next episode. So guys, thanks for doing this, and we'll get you right back on.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 219 of the Strength Coach Podcast. I just want to apologize for that. We had some pretty bad sound quality on with Stu and Brian there for a little bit, and tried to do our best I can to fix that, but just had a little bit lower quality that time, but hopefully next time we can fix that. Well, special thanks to Chris Parr and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now they're having 30% off selected items, free shipping on orders over $59. Restrictions do apply, so check it out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle, Dr. Stuart McGill, and Brian Carroll for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning, performance enhancement. Remember, they're coming back on next show for part 2. Alan Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Eric Degatti and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. Get all the access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access the offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Renda. You can check everything out at continuefit.com. Make sure you sign up for the Success Series, 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.